I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room with the laptop on my lap. My wife is cooking something in the kitchen, and I slide the wireless network card in for the first time that lined up to the D-Link wireless access point that was just installed in my office, and I boot the laptop. I turn to my wife while it's booting. I go, honey, I'm about to get on the internet, and I held up my laptop, and I said, and I'm not plugged in. I don't remember what she said. Probably something like, that's nice, dear. So I log in, I open Internet Explorer, which was about the only browser back then, and bam, there's the homepage. I lifted my laptop in there. I go, I am on the internet. And I literally ran to every single room of my house, going to a different web page for each one. And I would scream, I am on the internet. My wife used to me by this point, just flip the pancake or whatever she was cooking. I came back out. I was like, I got to show this to you. Never before has technology so revolutionized how we operate as wireless networking. As we continue through the devices of our network infrastructure, we've already taken out the switch and the router and another nugget. We're going to focus in on the wireless access points, controllers, and firewalls that make our networks what they are. Well, let's start off with wireless access points because I'm still buzzing from that technology. So wireless access points, in essence, translate your wired network into airwaves. And they are amazingly complex in how they do that. I'll never forget the first time I taught a CCNA wireless class. I was already a CCIE, and I was kind of like, it shouldn't be a problem until I opened the book, right? I was like, wow, there's a whole new world. And that's why there is a whole other certification track. We're in CCNA routing and switching right now, right? There's a whole parallel track sitting right next to us that goes through wireless associate, wireless professional, wireless internetwork expert. I mean, you can go all the way into this technology because you are in a whole new world of managing the unmanageable. What I mean by that? Well, there's a movie back in the 1980s called Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater. I just remember that, where he ran a pirate radio station in his dorm room in college, right? And he got busted because the FCC said you can't do that. You can't broadcast on airwaves that are considered regulated. But the FCC also said, and I'm talking about an American institution that governs the radio frequencies, and there's different institutions all over the world that do the same thing. The FCC has what they call the unlicensed band. They are 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, and 5 gigahertz, which should be familiar to you, especially if you come from back in my day when we had cordless phones. Man, I feel like I'm dating myself right now. Remember when cordless phones, I'm not talking cell phones, I'm talking cordless phones, right? First came out, you had these 900 megahertz phones. Now, the beauty of these frequencies is, first off, the lower frequency. This is, by the way, megahertz, like less than a gigahertz. And then you have gigahertz as you go down. The lower the frequency, the farther the range can go, but the less bandwidth you have. Right? There's a good principle to embed in your head. The higher frequencies, for instance, 5 gigahertz, you get more bandwidth, but not as much range. And by the way, 5 gigahertz is currently the darling frequency of the industry, and I'll explain more about that in just a second. But when I say managing the unmanageable, FCC has said, well, we aren't going to manage these. We're not going to govern these. So anybody can do whatever they want. So the wireless network that you set up for today may be interfered with tomorrow by some neighbor company who builds a building right next to you and puts up their own wireless network. So you're kind of playing this game of like, okay, well, we've got these airwaves and anybody can come in and interfere with it, and that's okay, as long as they're not being malicious, like using equipment that goes beyond the power that the FCC has governed these devices should have, which as long as you're buying them from legal areas, the power shouldn't go beyond it. You have to come in here and ensure that all your communication happens over these unmanaged frequencies. We use primarily nowadays the 2.4, I got a little decimal right there, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz spectrums for our wireless networks. This is the frequency that the wireless access point broadcasts on. Now, you can buy wireless access points that are one or the other, like there's a wireless access point that only does 2.4 gigahertz, and there's a wireless access point, actually I haven't seen many of them, but they have them, that only do 5 gigahertz, and then you can get some that do both. You see all these different antennas, some that can do 2.4 and 5 gigahertz at the same time. Now, 2.4 is the one that took the world by storm. lot of reasons for that. One, it broadcast further. The chips were cheaper to produce. And when it came out, it was like, it was the cat's meow, if I can say that. Everybody bought into wireless and they equipped all their buildings with this 2.4 gigahertz space. So the reason I say that is because this is a saturated space. A lot of stuff uses it, a lot of interference, and a very difficult challenge to get a clean channel in that space. As a matter of fact, when we dive deeper into wireless, you'll find out that there's 11 channels, at least in the United States. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, right? Now, people go, okay, so that means I have 11 channels that I can choose to avoid interference. Well, not really, because when we say channels, what you're actually talking about is a little slice of the spectrum. Like if I were to draw it out on a graph, I could say, well, channel 1 actually goes, here's my channel, from 2.401 gigahertz all the way up to, and I'm going to butcher this, but you can actually find this graph online, 2.4, let's just say 09 gigahertz, right? Now, channel 2, let me just draw it down here, would do something like this, where it goes from 2.4, let's just say 05 gigahertz all the way up to 2.412. And again, I'm just making up these values, but the concept is absolutely accurate in that these channels actually overlap each other. So what I'm saying is if you install a wireless access point in your building, here's your building, and then you install a second one because this one doesn't cover the whole building or your house or wherever you're doing this, you want to make sure they're on clean channels. And if you put this guy on channel 1 and this guy on channel 2, you haven't done that because they're going to broadcast their frequency like that and like that, and you'll have this area of overlap where it's just a mess. The speed will be slow. You'll have packet loss because you'll have these interfering channels getting in the way of each other. The fact of the matter is 2.4 gigahertz only has 3 clean channels. They are channel 1, channel 6, and channel 11. So I could put this on channel 1 right here and then have a neighboring wireless access point on channel 6, and they wouldn't interfere with each other, right? But it becomes a challenge because we've got big buildings. So we got this guy on channel 11, and then we bring up a second story right above it, and we've got, vertical interference, horizontal interference. It's like, oh. So you can see this becomes quite the challenge, and that's why 5 gigahertz has become the darling of the industry, is because 5 gigahertz, first off, is not used as much, but more importantly is it has more clean channels that we can use, and even more important than that, it's not as powerful as 2.4. The signal doesn't travel as far, as I mentioned, with the higher frequencies, which initially are like, well, that's a problem. Actually, no, it's a really good thing, because the problem that we have over here is signal overlap, where they're too powerful and they overlap with different signals and all that kind of stuff, and you end up with these very poor quality signals. But with 5 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, you get these little spheres of concentrated, super powerful wireless access signal that go in all the different areas of the building. And inside of the middle of each of these circles is your wireless access point, right? A lot easier to do. You can control the power, you can control the channel to get that clean signal. So what you'll typically see in a building design, and man, I'm getting a whole leg ahead of myself right now, but hopefully this gives you a good idea, is you'll see some of them that are enabled for 2.4, which do this big sweeping signal. So it gets into the hallways, it gets into the break room, it gets into all these areas where, wireless access points is, or wireless access is needed, but it's not like, oh, this is driving business. This is like somebody walking on their cell phone, surfing the web in a hallway, as they're walking or something like that. Okay, 2.4 is fine for that. But in the concentrated areas, like maybe a school classroom where the students are doing online testing in a lab, or maybe an area where they're streaming a video stream, a thing like the company meeting online or something like that. Okay, that's where we need the concentrated 5 gigahertz spectrum. Now, if you've got a building where just a couple wireless access points will do, then using what's known as the standalone wireless access point model will work just fine, where you go in and configure each one of these. But the more and more of these things you have, the more they're like the Minions. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie where you got all these little yellow guys that do all of the work, and you have to have some kind of central control, because it's going to be crazy if you try to manage them on their own. If interference kicks up at any point in time, if the power gets too strong or too weak for that time of day, you just can't keep up with it, and that's where you need one of these really expensive controllers. Now, this device looks like it just has ports for 4 wireless access points. That's not the case. This thing could control 10, 20, 50 different wireless access points. You just plug it into the switch, right? And the switch connects to all of them, and this is kind of like the overlord that comes out and says, okay, I'm watching these signals, I'm making sure that I'm adjusting the powers and the channels as needed in the network. And they also do things like auto configuration. So you pull one of these things out of the box, plug it into the network, it detects the controller and automatically adopts the common configuration that your company has. It's not uncommon for a large building, to have 100 wireless access points, and it's just unmanageable without some level of controller. So back to our icons. When you're drawing wireless access points on a network diagram, Cisco uses symbols that look like this, a little square with squiggly lines representing the radio frequency going across. Sometimes they'll actually use that wireless access point image, which I like a lot better. I don't know, it looks like a piece of cake or something like that to me. So I just call this the better WAP. And then over here on a network diagram, you'll have one or more controllers. A lot of time you'll want redundancy inside of your controllers, because if one goes down, you don't want to lose the wireless network. So throughout CCNA routing and switching, you'll see wireless pop up, but it's more of an honorable mention. And just note that it is out there all over the place, and there's a completely separate certification track that focuses just on wireless technology. Okay. That explanation took a little longer than I thought it would. So let's break off firewall and IPS into another nugget. For now, we have seen core network infrastructure up to this point of switches, routers, wireless access points, and controllers. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.